Hi, I'm Peter Reynolds, and welcome to Mother Nature Doesn't Give a Crap with Geoff Sheffrin. We've spoken a lot on this podcast about the benefits of nuclear energy to help combat the climate crisis and the innovative technologies that are being developed around the world to make it cleaner, safer, and more affordable. On today's episode, we're going to continue that conversation with David Tyndall, Director of New Technologies at Ontario Power Generation, and talk about the innovations of OPG and their vision to help Ontario achieve net zero carbon emissions and reduce nuclear waste. And someone who knows all about waste and that we have no time to waste when it comes to solving the climate crisis is professional engineer Geoff Sheffrin. Geoff, good to see you again.
Peter, thanks for the invite, and I'm delighted to have Dave on board today. Whilst this is a continuation, if you like, of more nuclear discussion, it is a very different segment, and I think it's important to link these two, because what we need to do in green energy availability is incredibly broad-ranging. And whilst we have hydro and we have wind and we have solar, nuclear is the piece that often gets a bad rap, and I'm trying hard to push the fact nuclear doesn't deserve a bad rap. And we need everything in this planet because the other utopian solutions like fusion, they're too far away. We'll be dead by then as a species. So I'm very keen to have Dave here and love to get into that section of the podcast.
Absolutely. So why don't we just jump right in and introduce Dave Tyndall, who's the Director of Nuclear Technologies at Ontario Power Generation. And David has over 25 years experience in the nuclear industry, leading research and developing efforts for new technologies that transform the way we generate clean energy. David, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me, Peter and Geoff. It's great to be here. I'm looking forward to the talk today.
David, maybe we could start for those who maybe only think about energy, during a blackout. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about, Ontario Power Generation.
Sure. OPG is one of North America's largest clean power producers. We generate over 18,000 megawatts of clean power in the province of Ontario, but also outside of Ontario. We have a number of hydro assets that actually span across the U.S. through one of our subsidiaries. We have a broad portfolio that includes nuclear, it includes solar, it includes hydroelectric, and we do have some gas plants as well, and some other thermal stations that really serve to back up the grid when the renewables aren't generating. But our big focus really is our nuclear assets for the purposes of strong baseload generation.
Maybe you could talk, and I know Geoff is chomping at the bit to get into the weeds here, but maybe you could talk a little bit about the goal of net zero and how nuclear can help us achieve it.
Sure, and so OPG has a climate change strategy, and in that climate change strategy, which you can find on our website, it really speaks to needing a number of different sources of energy to really meet that net zero economy by 2050 and a net zero company by 2040. So we're looking at many different strategies to address it, and whether that's expanding some of our hydro fleet, we're looking at innovating and changing the way we do business. We're electrifying, our vision being electrifying life in one generation is a key message for us. And so we do that through the bus fleets and the transit fleets. But it also comes down to nuclear being part of that solution. We have seen it, and whether you read the International Energy Agency or whether you read the Ontario's IESO, the Independent Electrical System Operator, and their pathways to decarbonization, the strong message is there is no path to net zero without nuclear. And so nuclear has to be part of the solution. And it's not just like one form of nuclear. So, we can talk a little bit more about, hey, what do you mean there's not just one form of nuclear? Because really, most of us have just grown up with this area where nuclear is just these big power stations. And now that's not the case anymore. Or there was research reactors on the very small scale at universities, or there was maybe some purpose-built isotope reactors. But really, kind of what were all the different sizes of reactors? And now we see nuclear playing a much bigger role than just power generation. If we think about the world as we know it, nuclear reactors really just used to generate baseload power. That's what they do. And so with the advent of small modular reactors and micro reactors, we see a lot more role for nuclear to play in achieving a net zero economy.
Can you explain baseload?
Sure. So baseload power is really kind of this kind of flat line, if you think about it. So we all have businesses that we run, we all have houses that we run, and at any given point in the day, there's really kind of a minimum amount of power that just gets generated, or that needs to be generated to meet our demand. So whether that is our whether it's just our lights on in our houses, or it's things that are charging our businesses, that's where our I'll call it the base load is. Now that goes up and down during the day. So when we think about where is our power going every day, depending on the time of year, we see either a summer peak. So when our AC comes on and base load goes up in the summer because everybody's cooling their houses. During the day, we usually see a peak at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day as people are cooking and they're turning their lights on, they're getting up in the morning, they're getting all their processes started at work. And so there's, a different demand, but base load is really that kind of, it never really goes below a certain number.
And Dave, correct me, but I think what's a delight about our nuclear here in Ontario is the base load makes up a good 50%, if not more, from nuclear. And that is
Absolutely.
A steady 24/7, 365 days a year. And that is a critical piece of our stable infrastructure. It's one of the reasons why our province, if it were a country, would be one of the top 10 greens in the world.
Correct. Yeah. Nuclear makes up, kind of about the 60% mark of our base load, combined with our large hydro, right? We've been blessed with both some plentiful hydro assets that allow us to generate, but then where we can't expand, I'll call it massively in hydro, there's some opportunity for new hydro, and we're going to go after that too. Because it's an all tools in the toolbox approach to meet the whole demand. You need that nuclear piece, and that 60% nuclear that we've had for the last few decades has really served us well in having one of those cleanest grids in the world as it sits today.
So I guess that it's that consistency, this idea of
correct.
The sort of the utopian idea of all our energy needs are solved by wind and solar. That's not something that could handle a baseline 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
No, and look, we love renewables. Don't get me wrong. I mean, there's not. I'm not here to disparage them because I believe they're great. They have a lot to bring to. They have a lot to bring. But when you look at, the kind of the hottest days of the year, or the coldest days of the year, that's often the days that correspond where there is no wind and there is no sun. And depending where you are in the world, wind doesn't blow all the time and the sun doesn't shine all the time. So you think about Ontario and how far north we are, we get limited hours of daylight in the summertime. So it's harder to generate, I'll call it that base load off of a solar type arrangement or a wind type element without having these massive forms of energy storage. And so energy storage is also part of this, but you have to look at the things like, can you get batteries big enough? Can you, is there gigawatts of storage? Lots of ideas on the table about how that could potentially be looked at, but are they really technology ready that you have these really long duration storage piece? Nope, but everybody's pushing towards it. These are all solutions engineers are working on. How do you get it? But it all is part of that kind of a bigger energy mix. And so, we love pumped storage too. You look at Niagara Falls, we don't just generate power just because the water's falling. We also, in the evening, when power price is cheap, we fill a reservoir and then we use that to, I'll call it generate power when it comes out of that reservoir. So there are energy storage solutions, but you can't meet it all with that. So that's why we need more capacity on the grid, not just energy. It's not just that we need energy. It's what we call capacity. And there's that difference. And that capacity is really what we talked about in that reliable baseload piece in terms of it's there and it's available to be used at a switch. It's not dependent on the sun shining, the wind blowing, or the river flowing, right? That's the part that nuclear brings to it.
And I think the capacity piece also then leads us into the ability to distribute the power. And I think when you look at the distribution infrastructure, Canada is this unique 95% of the populace is along this 200-kilometer wide band, 8,000 kilometers long. But we have a whole bunch of stuff going up north, whether it's indigenous communities, other small communities, mining activities, all sorts of critical things. And putting a grid up there of large power requirement is a challenge. But I think that's the segue into us getting into the SMR discussion.
Sure, yeah, and agreed, and transmission is a big deal, and it's going to be, we need to expand the transmission system. I think that's pretty well recognized. Yeah, it's going to be big. So in order to really decarbonize, we're going to need that. But to your point, Jeff, is that we are this geographically diverse and spread out type of country, and so not every solution is going to work. I can't put big plants and transmit it long distances because that's inefficient. We're making losses. We're just generating heat. What do we try not to do? We're trying not to just generate heat, right? So, we don't want to just put power lines up everywhere. Nobody likes those either. So we like what comes out of our wall socket, but we don't want everything everywhere. So if we can figure out how to make these distributed resources, that becomes an important part of this. And that's where, for lower population densities, small or micro reactors can absolutely make sense. And then there's these industrial users today that we have that, lots of little cogeneration plants. So natural gas burning to generate heat and steam. Well, why do I need to do that with burning gas? There's many different types of reactors out there that could generate some of these high pressure, high temperature steam profiles that'll let us decarbonize those industries as well. So that's other areas that SMRs are coming to.
Absolutely,
we believe they have a role in.
Yeah, and I definitely want to get into SMRs, and we've talked about it in previous episodes, or small modular reactors. In your title, it says Director of New Technologies at Ontario Power Generation. I'm wondering, this idea of new nuclear. What do we mean when we say new nuclear?
Well, it's kind of an interesting question, Peter, in terms of new nuclear just means we don't have it today. So my spectrum goes across a number of different areas. So I'm looking at new nuclear power plants. So whether that is a micro reactor or a small modular reactor or large nuclear or fusion, that's all going to fall under my portfolio around new nuclear power plants. So I'm using nuclear fuel to generate electricity or generate energy. So it could be that we're generating heat. So that's what falls under my portfolio. So when you start thinking about, is nuclear fission new? Not really. But it may not be a can-do technology that we use in micro reactors. That they don't make a micro reactor that's a can-do. They make larger type reactors. So today we have to look at what are all the various technologies that are out there, and so that's what my team's been doing over the last few years, is really looking at what's available around the world, what's available in North America, what can be ready to deploy on the timelines that we need them to be ready in. And so, that's how we've kind of got to where we are today, and why we're undertaking the Darlington new nuclear project and deploying those reactors, why we've got our Global First Power joint venture to look in micro reactor space. And these are different forms of reactors. So, they're all fission-based reactors. Fusion's still a little while away, that's for sure, as Jeff kind of talked to. We're following it, but it's not ready today. The fission reactors, though, we're not using, I'll call it a heavy water-based reactor when we look at the new projects at this point. We're looking at, the Darlington project's a boiling water reactor, been around for decades. Like, some of the first reactors were boiling water reactors. The micro reactor we're looking at and our industrial partner reactor that we're dealing with, those are both high temperature gas reactors. Gas reactors have been around for a long time. The UK had a fleet. Now, those were carbon dioxide as opposed to helium cooled, but the helium cooled reactors, hey, they're operating in Japan, they're operating in China, they had them in the US for years. So the reality is it's not really, I'll call it new tech. It's really I'll call it old tech, it reimagined and deployed in a much smaller way. So that's how we see it today.
Right. I wonder if we could then sort of dig a little bit into, because Darlington, I gather, has been a very successful retrofit as a nuclear power station, on time, on budget, and just going through the end phases of completion. And it's also now the selected site for the SMR project that both the feds and the province have invested in. And it's one of the many that you're leading. So, I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. Why Hitachi?
Yeah.
Because there are several different designs. It's a fascinating area, and it's such a critical area for us to move forward on. So, what can you tell us about that part of the process, reference to the SMRs at Darlington?
Yeah, Geoff, it's been a few years in the making in terms of getting to where we got to today. So it's been an exciting time. When I joined the new nuclear team back in 2020, we were actually looking at about 10 different technologies, and we went from 10 down to 6, down to 3, down to the one we picked. And when we got down to 3, we actually made a pretty public announcement, and the approach we took was actually we worked for a year with all three of those companies and advancing the design and the project planning and really truly understanding what the right fit for us was in terms of, hey, when can we be on the grid? Hey, does it fit within the environmental assessment that we had already done at Darlington, a decade ago that we maintained? Did it give us the right risk profile that we were, I'll call it comfortable and confident in being able to deploy within the decade? That was really important to us because, as is noted in the title of the podcast, you can't wait. We have to take some action, right? Like we have to get on with it. And that's about, seeing those initial capacity shortfalls. When does that start happening? It's in the late 2020s, right? We start to see a capacity shortfall, small one, not a big one yet. Yeah, it comes later, but the small capacity shortfalls start to come in the late 30s. So hey, around 300 megawatts was actually a really good size for the Ontario grid and where we needed it to it. So that's how we really got to them. So it's about that confidence in being ready to deploy. Now, let's not pretend that there are no challenges. There's always challenges in any mega project. And I think really that's what we've shown we can do. To your point about the refurbishment, is that's given us the confidence. So it's not an overconfidence. We know where the challenges are. Like any project has challenges. Let's call a spade. But the fact that we've been able to assemble a team with good partners, we understand that you have to get your design done ahead of time. Like that's been one of the pitfalls, right? When you look at these large nuclear builds in other jurisdictions that have gone way over schedule, way over budget, they started with very little design done. They might have had a basic design done and got into construction, and that's a danger zone. So we have those lessons and that refurbishment experience, as you say, on time and on budget. Still proud to say that we're marching ahead. We've got one unit done. Second unit's well underway, and starting to look at the subsequent units and make sure that they all stay on track. But we're well into this program, on time, on budget, and that's a huge success. And so we're using those lessons learned, lots of the same people, in order to make the SMR project a reality at Darlington. So it comes down to, how do you work together as a team? How do you manage risk, and how do you solve them?
Just wondering, David, if for the layman out there, when they talk about this refurbishment at Darlington, can we sort of, is there a way of describing it in simple terms of, what existed before, why a refurbishment was required, and what we should see after?
Sure. So CANDU stations, so the pressurized heavy water reactor that we have, has a core, and that core is made up at Darlington of 480 tubes, channels that go through, and each one of those channels has a fuel bundle in it. And due to the fact that you have the nuclear fuel in there and the fission reaction going on, metal actually changes as it's irradiated. So it gets longer, it picks up hydrogen over time. And so we do detailed inspections and life management programs to monitor the health, because those are really the I'll call it the limiting components for us to continue to operate. And so there's always a midlife refurb in a CANDU plant. And so what do you do in that midlife refurb? You're taking out all of the fuel, you're taking out all of those tubes, and you're putting new tubes in, and then you're putting fresh fuel in and restarting up. That's the big work. And so it's a lot of piping work and the pieces that really, if you kind of make it akin to a car, I've kind of put a new engine in the car. I didn't, the block is still the same, but I've done my pistons, I've put in, some new heads, I've done that work. And then around the rest of the car, I did a lot of other little tweaks because I had the opportunity in my schedule. So, we're going to do turbine work. We're going to replace some valves. We'll do some other, component replacements that we do, as well as safety improvements. So safeties are overriding consideration in everything. And as we have the opportunity, we always work to improve reliability and improve safety. And so those are all opportunities that we do during these refurbishment outages. And really that's the major parts of it, Peter.
Great.
And just a couple of observations there. I know up at Bruce, they're also embarking on an extensive 10-year program. They're just underway on that for doing exactly the same program, because that will extend those reactors up there. Bruce, of the three that we have in Ontario, is the biggest. Matter of fact, it's one of the biggest in the world, but it's the biggest, and it's on that program. And I've heard some buzz that Pickering is, instead of being shut down, is now actually going to be talked about to have that one put onto the program, which I believe is critical for our future, because we've got an 18 gigawatt base load from our nuclears, and we need to maintain that and then find ways of increasing it. And SMRs is a piece of it.
Yeah, for sure. And so we're excited that we were asked to we'll call it relook at the feasibility of Pickering and doing that refurbishment. And, that's work that's ongoing this year. So I can't speak, kind of to all the details of it. But what I can tell you is, we remain confident that there is a case, to your point, Geoff, that we can make to life extend those reactors for sure. And you're right, Bruce is doing their program up there as well. And that's the nice part about the nuclear industry, is we all work together. It's a really interesting book that was many years ago written that was called Hostages of Each Other. And, what it comes down to, and really the pretext of it is, we have to work together, because one bad nuclear power plant is every plant's problem, not just that plant's problem. So we as an industry, we have two major industry, whether it's the World Association of Nuclear Operators or the Institute of Nuclear Power Operators in the U.S., or the IAEA. We work together to make sure everybody's safe. So, Bruce and OPG have worked together and collaborated on making sure we get the lessons learned shared between our organizations to make sure that we are successful together, because we want to see clean power in Ontario for sure.
Yep, absolutely.
So I was just going to ask about pushback and this idea of, as
Sure.
as you're explaining it to me, I mean, it completely makes sense. And this idea of having small modular reactors that can be in remote communities to give communities energy independence. It all sounds fantastic. And so I'm wondering sort of what if any pushback the industry is experiencing, and what is your sort of reaction to that, and how are you sort of managing that?
Yeah. Hey, there's always going to be pushback on anything. And really, this comes down to building relationships and talking and being a transparent organization. So there's a lot of stigma around nuclear, Peter, and what it is and what it isn't. There's been big challenges around the world at times, right? Whether you want to go back to Chernobyl, or you want to go back to 3 Mile Island or Fukushima, and or even the concerns and I'll call it some of the challenges that are going on in Ukraine right now, and the flags that get raised there. And so there's lots of questions about safety, about security, about waste. What do we do with all of that, and how do we manage it? And so, our biggest thing is about getting into where do we see potential opportunities for this. It's getting out and talking with the people, whether those are the Indigenous communities, or it's the municipalities, or the government shareholders, or the industrial end users. We see lots today where they're reaching out and going, hey, what is this nuclear thing? Like, we're kind of interested in it. We might be interested in doing it. But we hear parts of those same people, or the same parts of their communities, are saying, hey, like, we're concerned about this. Can you help me understand? And so, part of, one of the reasons why I'm here is trying to help people understand what it is and what it isn't, and be real about it, right? So, we spend a lot of time talking about fuel and what do we do with used fuel. And so in Canada, there's the Nuclear Waste Management Organization that has the long-term accountability for, the I'll call it disposal of used fuel. And so, but we have to work with them, right? We can't just say, well, it's your problem. No, we have to hold it until they're ready. So, it comes down to, well, how do you store it? And really
everybody's
knowing that
problem,
there's
but
solutions.
it's manageable.
Correct. I mean, we've been managing used fuel since day number one, right? Since,
Yes.
when you look at whether it was Douglas Point, which was one of the first commercial reactors in Ontario that's now, that resided on the Bruce site, or you look at Pickering that came on site in 1971. Virtually every single bundle that has ever been used at Pickering still resides on that site. We're talking, very dense form of energy. We know how to store it. We know how to monitor it. We have cameras that report back all the way back to the IAEA in Geneva. And so it's monitored 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We know the canisters. We know how to transport it. And we know how long it lasts. And so yeah, it is conceptually, though, difficult for people to start thinking, well, this is going to be, I'll call it highly radioactive or radioactive for, 10,000 years. That's not an easy concept to think about. And how do you know you're going to be doing something for 10,000 years? So it comes down to the way you assess it, and the amount of research that we do and has been going on for decades. And so that's how you can get the confidence in that science-based approach to it. But again, there's an emotional argument to it as well. And so you have to be respectful of that and thinking about, how does it go forth to future generations? How do we ensure that we don't impact Mother Nature with what it is? And so, again, it's an emotional argument. It is about prudent management and showing people what this looks like.
Yeah, but progressively, I mean, we do have alternatives. We are, I know there's work in the background going on with other people down in the US on alternative fuel rod sources, etc. And
Sure.
I don't want to get into a tangent about thorium, but there are alternatives, and some of those alternatives generate waste which is no longer able to be weaponized. So, there's some other elements there. But I also think it's important when I look at nuclear waste, some of the small modulars, and I'm not sure where the Hitachi unit, but some of the small modulars actually can use the spent fuel. So,
Yep.
but so
Yeah,
there's a dozen designs
you're
out
right,
there,
Pete.
but
Or Jeff, sorry. Yeah, you're right. There's lots of different ways to go about fuel. So like countries like France today, as an example of a country that already reprocesses fuel. So they take fuel out of a reactor, they reprocess it. There's their own challenges around that. But yeah, they reprocess it and then they deploy it into new reactors or into the same reactor after it's been reprocessed. So there are ways to go about this. And that's what's important is there are solutions, there are viable pieces. And right now, why don't I do that today? Well, a lot of it has to do with economics. If it's more expensive to do that, right? So, the CANDU reactors that we've run for years, it's a very closed fuel cycle for us, right? We can do it all in Canada. And
yes, that's true.
For the newer reactors, we're going to have to enrich fuel. But, the reality is, again, there's North American sources of enrichment, and we know how to do that. You can do it without proliferation and all those wonderful things. So it is possible, and you're right, there are solutions for it. It's a matter of what makes sense, and it's a balance. So, we're excited by the work that, for example, the Moltex is doing out in New Brunswick and ARC are doing out in New Brunswick that look at ways to potentially leverage used fuel in their new reactors. All of this can be managed very, very well and safely. It's a matter of when is it going to be ready, and that's like kind of kicking the butt. And so if you looked at, hey, how can we get to these clean energy pieces? We absolutely need to start moving, and so that's why we're looking at the X300 and being able to move fast there for the SMR portfolio. And hey, large nuclear is going to come back on the table with the order of magnitude. But we can't get to a large nuclear plant without having demonstrated that you could do things on time and on budget repeatedly, right? Like that's been the big thing. Like how do you go get financing on a project when you have the Vogels and the Hinckleys and those things that have gone so far over cost and schedule? That's a big risk profile for people. So demonstrating these small plants is going to be really important for unlocking that, right?
The other thing I think some people like to ignore when they want to override and overlook nuclear is that they think wind and solar is the solution. Well, not only is that not a 24/7 solution, but nobody really looks very critically, and I'm not trying to disparage that part of the industry. We absolutely need it to move forward. But when you look at the cradle-to-grave cost of doing solar, and you look at wind turbines, and we're only just after 30 years figuring out how to recycle the blades. All of those blades, as they come to end, they're going into landfill. So,
Right.
the wind and solar is not benign without its problems. And I think nuclear gets a disproportionate bad rap because people don't look at the other aspects of what goes on in the rest of the green.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point, Geoff, and maybe I'll turn it back over to you, Peter, in a sec. But it's an interesting point because that's one thing nuclear has been forced to do for decades, ever since we were basically, almost started, is we had to account for everything. We have to have decommissioning plans done as part of our initial licensing. So when you start to license a new reactor, I could have already thought about, well, how much waste am I going to generate at the end? So that includes, the concrete, the metal, and I could have a plan for it before I've been even allowed to build it.
Exactly.
And so, we get asked all of these questions, and we've been forced to account for our material for good reason. And actually, I think ESG governance over the time and looking forward is going to help us in that and level that playing field. But it is a
I think it'll also help offset the balance between wind, solar, and even hydroelectric. Hydroelectric, once it's up and running, is very, very benign from a carbon footprint viewpoint. Building it with a concrete and steel is one horror show from a carbon footprint viewpoint. But, once it's up, you've got almost, virtually, look at Niagara. We've got a century's worth of this stuff running.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's about that overall life cycle and impact. And that's what you have to look at, really. And that's what we're trying to do. But again, we believe it's all tools in the toolbox. We're going to need more wind. We're going to need more solar. We're going to need more hydro. It's all there. But for the big, reliable baseload, big capacity, we're going to need nuclear there as our tried and true and reliable.
The only good news with Mother Nature getting mad at us, we're going to get more ferocious storms, and therefore we'll have more wind. But never mind. Shut up, Geoff. Let's just get on. Let's get back to SMRs.
No, this is very interesting. The stuff I'm learning, because as you were saying, David, there's that emotional reaction, when it comes to nuclear, and I think, we talked about this in the previous episode of, people getting, little packages that live around, nuclear plants, and
little packages of iodine.
Yeah, and of the sort of the reality of that, and so of course, that's going to have an emotional reaction for people.
Of course,
sure. But if you actually start to look at it intellectually, and having these kind of conversations, when you realize that, solar and wind are fantastic sources of energy, but that the area that they take up, in order to generate the same kind of power that nuclear would.
Yes.
These are things that I never even occurred to me. The kind of deforestation it would take, what you would need to do to make these things
just
work.
Coverage of farmland, Peter. Like what we're able to do is 7 acres with nuclear, maybe a little bit bigger than that now, maybe 10 acres of nuclear, let's say, 1,600 acres of solar. And where are you going to build solar? Farm fields? So, hey, we need food. We're growing in population. So it's, again, it's about what's the right solution. So, I think solar has a role to play for sure, but that's the benefit of nuclear, is that it's just such a dense form of energy.
Yes.
I want to take you back to that point, though. You said, hey, there's an emotional piece. And if you start thinking about it, I'll call it purely from a logic point of view, that's never going to happen, though. And so one of the things that we believe is that you have to be open to having the emotional discussion, but we can't hide away in our power plants. We can't hide. We have to be open to having and having people challenge you And you learn something when that is, well, what is it that is actually driving the fear? Is it that they don't know? Is it that they will, they can never accept it? And that's okay. There are always going to be people who don't accept it, and that's fine. But for the people who don't accept it because they don't know or they've been misinformed, that's the people that we want to talk to, right? We want to talk to them about, here's what we are. Throw your questions at us. I've got nothing to hide, right? Like that's the big thing here is I really have nothing to hide from anybody. I want to show you what I bring. I want to show you that, are there things where this isn't I'll call it the silver bullet? Are there little things that you kind of talk to and go, oh, that's not as good as I would like it to be? Sure. Yeah, absolutely. But I can tell you what those are, and I'm willing to talk about it.
Right. I think the other thing that's helpful is data. I regularly use our word in data as a source, and there's one chart in particular where they array safety and they array CO2 production from all of the fuels, whether I'm going, wind, solar, nuclear, hydro, all the way up the scale through gas, through oil and coal. And when you start looking at those statistics on both the safety side and the carbon dioxide generation side, the fossil fuels are a horror show, unfortunately.
Yep.
And, we've got to find a way of transitioning our way out of that stuff in a constructive way. There's an incredible amount of employment opportunity in green that, we can migrate an incredible amount of the labor force that might have previously been deployed in fossils into green fuel. Yeah, we've got to spend some money training people and moving. It's just the nature of the climate crisis. It's not going to go away, guys. You can hide you can put your head in the sand if you like, but it ain't going to stop.
I wanted to touch on, Geoff, that point you made about training. And because I know we've talked about this in the past, the idea is it's one thing to put SMRs in remote communities. It's another thing to have people there, who know how to service them, who know how. And I'm wondering if Ontario Power Generation has thought about that, about having that capacity in those remote areas.
Well, I can chip in just as before you started.
Sure.
One of the things I love about all of the technology that's developing, as much as that cyber hack I had 2 weeks ago pisses me off, the great thing about it is we have incredible amount of remote monitoring capability, from direct links through all sorts of video capability, drones. David, I hope that's opened the door for you to talk about how you can manage an SMR up north.
Yeah, so there's lots to it, and so people is definitely going to be one of the challenges, Peter. We see that already in terms of where those knowledge bases are. The nice part is hey, Canada's been a nuclear nation for a very long time, and we've done a good job at I'll call it building a workforce that supports our nuclear industry. And so, we're engaging people on this project so we all learn and we bring the whole industry along. The industry shares with one another, and so. We do need more people, though. Like, if you look at the nuclear industry, we're all hiring. Everybody's hiring. And so we have very rigorous training programs internally. We've got great university nuclear programs. And so we're going to need more people. We're going to need more skilled trades, construction workers, whether it's welders, pipe fitters, people that are doing iron work, concrete work, modular buildings. That's all stuff we need. So it doesn't matter the trade, we're going to need skilled trades as well to enable these construction futures for all of these projects. So people is an issue. I don't want to say that it isn't. It is going to be an issue, but are we already looking at the training? Yeah, absolutely. Are we already looking? If you look at the Canadian SMR roadmap, had lots of interaction around education and resource demands, and there's industry working groups about bringing new people. And then to Jeff's point, innovation is the next big thing. So what do we do? How do you get these things if you're going to operate plants in remote areas and you can't afford to have hundreds of people working at these sites, or some of them are so small that you can really only have a few people working at the site. So you have to adjust your design thinking. So you have to think about security and security by design as opposed to I'll call it an afterthought. So whether it's limiting access to buildings and how you do that and all that security stuff that I can't actually talk about in public, but there's lots of things that are there. But remote monitoring. I mean, we've got autonomous drones now at sites that can go out and do inspections. I mean, we've remotely operated hydro dams for decades. So remote operation of power plants is not a new concept by any stretch of the imagination. And I think people maybe don't appreciate that, but we've got robots that we're looking at deploying at remote sites that can go do inspections for us. We get lots of data being fed back, so we know when to send workforce up to these remote sites. So remote monitoring, absolutely, something we're doing, and we will expand, and things that we'll do from centralized monitoring stations for fleets of reactors. That's all on the books. I mean, the concept of remote operation, I don't know when we're going to get to it. I think we can get to it, but I think call it one step at a time. Let's monitor it, have that central resource, and then maybe we look at control on the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any final questions or thoughts, Geoff?
Well, I think we covered an awful lot of ground on the nuclear side, which is great. And whilst we isolated the SMRs to a degree in various pieces of that, which is terrific, I think what we've done is painted a reasonably broad picture about the nuclear piece. And I think if people go and dig into the data about, I think, the two big psychological barriers that I think are in the public eye, or should I say are not in the public eye because of inadequate information. One of them is spent fuel and its disposal. And the other, of course, is all of the mythology that goes around nuclear safety, driven by the events like Chernobyl, Fukushima, and 3 Mile Island, and a few in Europe. These were unmitigated disasters. But when you look at the statistics, they were isolated incidents driven by unusual circumstances. Fukushima was already over-designed for a tsunami. The tsunami that Mother Nature threw at it was bigger than the over-design. These things will happen. And well, Chernobyl is a whole nother matter. That was just a disaster from the outset. And 3 Mile Island became a whole non-issue. It was more media than real. It was a real issue, but you know what I mean? It was more media hype than a problem.
Yeah, I think, but it's important to learn the lessons that came out of those, and that's something I think that I've always felt good about working in the industry, is that we learn a lot of lessons, and whether you want to there's again emotional arguments about what you look at, and everybody says, hey, the whole right now with Fukushima and Japan releasing some of the water into the ocean, and I think I've read some pretty interesting stuff around that. You have to drink 330,000 liters of it to get more radiation than a CT scan. So but it's an emotional thing, and people think, well, I'm going to drink radioactive water, and no, I don't want you to drink radioactive water. I'm not asking you to do that, but it's a matter of, well, what is that? Right? Like, what are we actually talking about, and understanding that fact? So, but taking the lessons learned, and making sure that we've looked at it and said, okay, what is the worst thing that happens? How does that actually play out? How is decision-making made? Because, you look at some of those events, it was the people, it wasn't the machine. Had the people done nothing, the machine would have been in a better spot. So that's kind of an interesting piece, or decisions that were made like, look, some things can't happen. No, you have to. They could happen. Mother Nature shocks us at times, right?
That's right.
And so decision making.
And we're learning that it's getting worse. There.
Right. So today we're building climate change adaptation is a design requirement in our plants. So how do you deal with it? What happens if the world does get warmer? What happens if the storms become more intense? What happens if we get more snow? All of that has to be factored into the design and monitored over the life cycle. So that's another thing that, again, nuclear, we think about these things. That's what we do, and that's why there's a lot of people that work in nuclear, because we do a lot of thinking, and we look at what's the worst thing that can happen, and how do we address it? How do we mitigate it? How do we manage it? And then we have to convince a regulator. Like, we don't just get to go and get a license for the next 40 years. Like, every few years we're in front of a regulator saying, why are we still allowed to operate? Why is this plant still safe? What are we doing to take it to the next level? And so that's a very, very public, transparent process that anybody can participate in, right? It's not closed doors. It's not that we go in and have a side conversation and get a license. No, it's public hearings that take multiple days, and there are people that intervene, and it's an opportunity for everybody to have their say, right? That's the nice part about the nuclear industry.
David, what keeps you passionate about the industry? What keeps you going?
What keeps me going? I think a couple things. One, what we can leave as a legacy, and I think when I look forward, I want my kids to have a planet that's here and that's healthy, and so making sure that they have something that they can be proud of, and that they know I contributed to helping. That's what kind of one of the things that keeps me, I'll call it intrinsically motivated, is I want to leave a good legacy for the future generations. The people that I get to work with keep me motivated. Whether that's the people in the community, and that could be the people that are challenging me, they keep me thinking, right? Or the people that I work with and challenge to think differently, or the people that I get to challenge to work differently. Hey, like nuclear was a very stagnant kind of organization for a number of years, and thinking about ways to challenge our mindset and bring lessons from other industries, like, we're talking robotics and AI and all those fun things that everybody thinks at the forefront. Those weren't associated with nuclear 10 years ago. But bringing that in and showing people how we could do it, that's what keeps me going. Between the people I get to work with and leaving a legacy, that's what makes me tick.
Dare I ask the counter question? What keeps you awake at night, Dave?
I'll call it the sheer ability to move as fast as we need to move.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I think we all see climate change, and that's why it excites me to be part of the company I'm with, that we want to move fast. It's that ability to move fast. Making sure that the technologies are ready, making sure that we have the necessary amounts of financing and resources, and that we have the human resources to be able to get out there and do what needs to be done. And so I think we're seeing that mindset shift, but that's the big thing that kind of keeps me up and going, hey, it feels like there's a lot of weight on the shoulders sometimes. Like we got to go do this, and we got to do it now. And so it's figuring out the strategies to make sure all that we're able to do it.
It falls into place. Yeah.
Well, your passion has really come through
Absolutely
during this podcast, David. Thank you so much for sharing your insights.
No problem at all.
I'd love to end the podcast, as we do often, talking about new technology, and
Sure.
I wanted to just throw out this thing that's been popping up in the news. So Australian scientists have discovered an enzyme that converts air into energy, and this is absolutely blowing me away. This is science fiction stuff. The finding that was published March 8th in the journal Nature reveals that this enzyme uses low amounts of hydrogen in the atmosphere to create an electric current. And this finding opens the way to create devices that literally make energy from the air. David, what goes through your mind when you hear about this?
I just love the sheer ingenuity of people, but also that just makes me like, how many things about Mother Nature do we not actually truly understand? Like, you kind of think of it and you're like, wow, that's amazing, right? And so these creatures have powered themselves for years, or the enzymes have powered themselves for years, and okay, that's pretty cool. So how do we leverage this? That's my question. Mm-hmm. And how big can it be? And I think I've seen the article pop up and kind of read it, and there's lots of questions, there's lots of work to be done, but the fact that people are looking at it and looking at different ways, that's awesome. And I think one day, do we have these like sensors, or maybe my watch is powered by this? I don't think it replaces power generation. I just don't. But hey, if it gets there, that's awesome. But I just, from everything I've read so far, it's kind of like, hey, we might get to powering a watch sometime, but we'll figure it out. So it's exciting that people go and look for these things, right? So it's good.
Your job is safe for the time being, I think, David.
I think so.
But Geoff, your thoughts?
Well, I just thank you, Dave. I just love having had this conversation. I think it's terrifically useful. There's just so much going on out there. In my next podcast, I want to rant and rave a bit about so many positives, and this little hydrogen sucking enzyme to me is just one of those many things. And we have so many of these types of things developing, which unfortunately are 20 or 30 or 40 years of development away before they're big scale and can replace what we're doing now. Meanwhile, the stuff we're doing now is just critically essential to move us forward. And that's one of the reasons I'm on the OSPI task force. It's one of the reasons I'm up on my rooftop, as you kindly put it, Peter, trying to yell and scream at people about the fact that 2030 is too freaking late. You know, we just got to get on with this stuff, and I'm just delighted that we have the opportunity to do this.
Well, that I think is a great way to end the podcast. And on behalf of myself and Geoff, David, I want to thank you again for spending time with us today, sharing your insights on the future of nuclear power and the leadership role that Ontario Power Generation is taking when it's coming to develop and implementing this technology. And as always, we want to thank our audience, whether you're watching this on YouTube or you're listening on your favorite podcast app. You're what makes this all possible. And we absolutely would love to get your comments, your questions. We're actually going to be starting a segment on the podcast where we answer questions. So whether you're seeing this on YouTube or on a podcast app or a clip on Facebook or Instagram, leave a comment, ask a question. We'd absolutely love to hear from you. So thanks again to David. Thanks
Can I also
again to
just
Geoff.
say, Peter?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Geoff.
Can I just say my usual closing? You know, Peter always, I always have to push Peter. My usual closing is: movers make things happen. Everyone else is a spectator. So go out and be a mover. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Mother Nature Doesn't Give a Crap. My name is Peter Reynolds, and we'll see you next time.